Welcome to the What's So Smart podcast, powered by the Huntsville Madison County Chamber of Commerce. I'm your host, Clark Dunn. Huntsville, Alabama is known as a smart place, but really, what's so smart about it? In this podcast, we will talk to the leaders of Huntsville's economic and cultural development to answer that question. From rockets to genomics, from cyber to music, What's So Smart will explore the visionary and data-driven initiatives that make Huntsville so smart. Stay connected with us on all your social media platforms at A Smart Place. You can watch the full conversations on our YouTube channel at Huntsville, Alabama, USA, and be sure to subscribe wherever you listen. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy this episode of the What's So Smart podcast. Well, welcome to the What's So Smart podcast. Super excited for you to be here today. Would you like to introduce yourself, and we'll kind of get started there?
Sure. My name is Jay Langley. I've been in Huntsville since 2006 timeframe. Currently, well, the reason I'm here for the It's So Smart, podcast is I founded a group called Huntsville AI back in 2018. Just kind of initially a working group. People that are curious about AI, like to talk about it, might be working in it, but may not. Just a pretty good cross section of people, and just reaching out, helping other organizations in town, doing things like that. Yeah. I'm the CTO at a small software company locally. So, Of course, I'm an engineer and do Department of Defense work, mostly MDA type things. But it's always interesting to see who you cross paths with here.
Yeah. And so, you've been here for going nearly 20 years, but you moved here from Orlando. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about kind of that move and what prompted it, and the what you knew about Huntsville before you got here.
Okay. So my wife and I, after we got married, I graduated from Mississippi State, and we moved from Mississippi to Orlando in 2000. And I was working with Lockheed Martin at the time, doing a simulation training type thing. Think of it as a very large computer game system for a lot of people at the same time. It was pretty cool work. And then not too long after we got there, the amount of people in one place was kind of getting to us. Mm-hmm. We had great coworkers. We had a great church we were involved in. A lot of good friends. We spent a lot of time going out to the beach and everything. But just the fact that it took an hour just to drive out of town, maybe, depending on how that was working, it just really started to grate on us a little bit. So I eventually got a transfer with Lockheed up here to Huntsville, which my wife's family's in Georgia. Okay. My family's in Mississippi. This is pretty much spot. 6 hours from both sides of my family. So it was a nice spot. It's also a lot more relaxed than Orlando. Mm-hmm. Lower taxes, lower cost of living. All of that was so nice. People are friendly, all that kind of thing. Yeah. It was weird when I first got here. I would show up to every meeting I had about 15 minutes early because I thought it would take that long to get there, and it didn't. Yeah. And then you show up in a parking lot, and it's like, well, what do I do now? That wore off eventually. But
yeah. As you've, you talked a little bit, alluded to it a little bit earlier, but just that. You've been a part of startups here in Huntsville for a while. Kind of, what did that first sort of exposure to startups kind of happen? And then how does the work you do on a day-to-day basis for your 9-to-5 kind of play a role in that?
Yeah, some of it is kind of a combination of two things. So when I was in Orlando, I went and did a master's degree at Florida Institute of Technology for computer science, but most of my classwork was in computer graphics and artificial intelligence. So I've always been kind of interested in AI. Of course, what we did back then was very, very different than what we do today. Not from the conceptual standpoint, but the actual technical parts of what make it work. So then moved up here and started doing, working up here, doing things. And sometimes on the Department of Defense side, you wind up somewhat constrained on what you're allowed to do for either cyber reasons or other kind of constraints that you wind up in. So eventually I was in a place I needed some kind of a creative outlet, and so started working through, I guess it was Huntsville Hack Night and Code for Huntsville were two different groups at some point that wound up merging and creating this thing called Co-working Night. Initially, we were meeting out at, it was the AL.com building downtown.
Oh, wow.
Way back in the day. And it was pretty cool. A lot of interesting, creative people. And the kind of thing that I really like, and you find this in several places, anywhere that you have the ability to be technical and creative at the same time. You find it in music. You know, you can be a very technical musician, but if you don't have the creativity, you're not, you're just playing stuff that's already written. Or if you're too creative and don't have the technical chops to back it up, you find the same thing in cooking. You find the same thing in photography. You find the same thing in computer science, writing software sometimes. So the co-working night was mostly a big mix of people that were just, I would say, creative professionals, people that were just wanting to do fun things. So initially it wasn't even really a startup thing.
So I first got to kind of know you and the work you were doing with Huntsville AI when I guess in 2021, I was tasked with kind of helping co-working night for Urban Engine. But you'd been doing Huntsville AI for about 3 years at the time. What sort of prompted that initial, hey, I want to start this group? And what did AI look like in 2018?
Well, it first started out from co-working night. Our first session, I'd already been going just to go to other people's sessions. You had about 5 or 6 kind of groups meeting together. You had Designers Corner, you had a Writers Corner, or a Writers Workshop. Some of the names just kind of shift and whatnot. Some interesting computer type stuff. Building things with Raspberry Pi. I mean, it was just a fun place to be because you were always around creative people. So there was a photography group. I don't know if I mentioned that.
Yeah.
That I was in for a while, doing things like that. So I'm like, well, let me start. Initially, it was a data science, machine learning, and AI. I think it was data science, AI, and machine learning or something like that. Because there is a lot of overlap between all of that. And we just didn't really quite have a niche. Because at the time, I was doing a lot more data science kind of stuff at work. So that was playing into it a lot. So we just started that off. We were meeting at Huntsville West at the time. And the best thing about it, and I would love to find a way to bring this back, or at least bring this somewhere that it can happen. We found that some of the most interesting conversations happen when people from one group cross paths with people from another group in the hallway. So we picked up one of the guys that comes in, regularly from Huntsville AI perspective, was in the actual designers group. He's a designer, but we just let me listen. He's just curious about the AI thing. And, but the same thing from a writer's perspective, from you just had such a cross of people that without some reason for them to be at the same place at the same time with and not just like a grocery store mindset where you're just kind of there to be there, but have an intent. You've already activated that creative, circuitry in your mind, and then you run across somebody else that has that same activation, but maybe a marketer.
Yeah,
maybe there was a marketing work group there too.
Yeah, I think that was one of the unique things too. As I started kind of helping with that, you'd see people that Huntsville AI, y'all would meet in the first hour, but people would want to come to the film co-op the second hour, but they would just come a little earlier and they would just sit in, and you just see kind of they're there wanting to continue a continued education and continuing to learn new things, and they're just the passion and the questions. And sometimes the best questions that I heard being asked were questions that weren't people that were in the group all the time. Right. And it's just a different perspective that they brought to kind of the work you were doing and the stuff that you were talking about.
Well, the main thing that I wanted to push from a Huntsville AI perspective was to make sure that people are aware that AI is something you can get involved in, you can do, you can learn about you don't need a PhD. You don't need a master's. You don't even have to be a computer scientist, to do some of the stuff that you can do with AI at this point. And it also helps us address one of the primary issues that you have in AI overall. It started off back a ways back with building data sets, to be used to train models and things, and then you wind up with parts of the data set had more data than other parts of the data set. and you wind up with some kind of a bias coming out of that, and that's one problem. The other problem is that the folks building these models didn't have the same they didn't have a very wide range of perspectives. They've only come at it with what they grew up with or what they know or whatnot. So there are things that would trigger somebody else to say, whoa, this is bad, that just didn't exist because we're just, culturally in two different places. And so that's part of the reason why it's imperative that we get as many people involved, especially at this point now that it's kind of taken off, is to make sure that we're aware that not only is it can it be used for a lot of different ways and things like that, the impact can be greatly different depending on what background you have or how it's used.
Yeah, and I think the startup scene itself in Huntsville is such a unique thing, and you've been able to see it kind of grow. Over the last couple of years, how have you seen AI kind of continue to play a role in the startup scene? Maybe not from even from your perspective and just kind of that, the role that you do play in that small software company, and kind of how do you integrate AI on a day-to-day basis, even maybe in your 9 to 5?
Oh, the fun part is people that are doing AI because they heard about it or went and read about it, watched some YouTube videos, and went and built a product. And then they come around and they come to the AI Huntsville group, and it's just kind of interesting sometimes about, wait, you did what? And it's like, well, there's one guy, I don't want to talk about too much of what he's working on because I don't know if it's too proprietary. But he found a way to use one of these language models to actually help with like a customer service perspective, and just went and built it.
Yeah.
He did. It was just kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And then sometimes people come across either our website or mailing list, from a friend or something. They wind up showing up, and it's really, really cool to see who's doing what.
Yeah.
From the 9 to 5 perspective, it is interesting from the Department of Defense side because, again, some of the constraints that they have to live with, you wind up being generally behind the curve a little bit. So you're almost following the commercial world. We did it with kind of like big data. That was something I was interested in and doing, talks about, probably 10 years ago time frame. Followed up with containerization, Docker containers, virtualization, and now we're kind of headed towards the AI era. And it's kind of switched to the point where a lot of the commercial side is ahead. And now you're trying to figure out, how do I get the stuff I see over here commercially? How do I bring that into my government lab that has, an air gap maybe? It's got different rules that apply. It has other kind of software that has to run and, things like that. It's just kind of, it'd be like as a writer if you were given a manual of phrases you can use.
Oh, wow.
Now you have to, and it's a challenge because now I have to say what I need to say, but these are the tools I have to work with. It's not impossible. It's just a different kind of a challenge.
Yeah.
So, that's interesting. The other fun part about being in Huntsville, where there's a lot of, again, DoD work and a lot of companies doing interesting things. A lot of companies will start something and they get their super secret proprietary work and everything, and they may or may not have Googled to see if what they're building is already out there. That's something you see a decent amount of. Well, hey, we got this. Well, yeah, that's been out for a minute. And again, with the AI, it's one of the things that's been increasing, and we talk about this about every year. And again, we'll do an end-of-year closeout. I think it's December 18th. We're going to have our last meetup of the year. We'll cover a 2024 in review. And one of the things we always do is, what did we talk about this year that did not exist the year before? So last year was the first year where nothing we had talked about in 2023 existed in 2022.
Wow.
So it's, it's not, some of the conceptual parts there. But, ChatGPT was a groundbreaking thing. You had Sora, it was a groundbreaking thing. Yeah, it's just time after time. It's just been breakneck speed. So part of what the Huntsville AI community is doing right now is kind of helping folks keep track of where things are moving. You know, we have an active channel on the 256 Discord where people, hey, I found this. Is this a thing, or is this just a press release, or is this actually something that might have some traction?
Interesting.
You know?
Yeah. And I think, as you've seen AI continue to grow and Huntsville continue to grow over your time you've been here, what do you kind of see the future looking like for the Huntsville community and the adoption of AI into things that, into maybe even everyday life?
Right. It's, part of it comes back to that impact statement. So you had things like movie recommendations. That's artificial intelligence, how that works behind the scenes. So if Netflix is recommending you the next movie you want to watch, if they get that wrong, well, no big deal. You get something, the next level up, something like Stitch Fix. Same kind of a product recommendation, but now they are putting things into a box and shipping it to you, and if you don't like it, you ship it back. If they miss that, it costs them money. You know, you take that up another level. Currently, to get on the Arsenal, there's a facial recognition lane that you can go through, AI related. If they get that wrong, that's a whole nother level of an impact.
Yeah.
So some of that comes into when we adopt things, personally or whatever. That's kind of like when I got in my truck to come here, I plugged in my phone. It knows that I have a meeting, for this podcast at the Chamber of Commerce. It pops up and says, would you like directions to the Chamber of Commerce? Yeah, sure. I've never been here before. So minimal, I would see things that are have a minimum level of impact being adopted extremely quickly, just because it's quite useful, things like that. Things that might have safety impacts or things like that, I would see taking a little bit longer as people are a little more hesitant. Kind of like self-driving cars and all, things like that. I thought we would have that by now.
Is there a unique industry that you've seen AI be implemented in and that you didn't necessarily think that would ever be possible?
Now, I don't know if not possible, but as in things that just took a turn that I didn't see coming. Was mostly, this is kind of old school, but back to the initial, Google search engine, where all of a sudden they've got search results and everything, and then, now let's actually put these in an order that we think a user would want to see. So instead of just doing a blanket search, here's all the things that contain the words. Well, here's the things that contain what you're looking for, but we're going to put them in an order that we think is best for you. So we're going to fill your first page of search with what we think you're keyed on.
Yeah.
And that basically allowed the way for advertising to jump right into your search engine.
Yeah.
Now it's in your email. Now it's in so you turn around and you realize that a lot of the companies that were using AI weren't necessarily using it for search. Well, yeah, they use it for search, but then they don't make money on search. They make money on advertising. Same with Facebook. Same with, all of these other engines that are, anything that recommends something to you. There's a reason why they put things in some order. So that was one of the surprising things for me. I didn't see that coming, but I'm not sure if the people that built it initially, that's more like kind of like how Slack started. It was actually, I think it was an internal tool for a game development company. And then the game they were building actually didn't take off or something. They found that this thing was way more useful as a communication tool for their teams.
Yeah, and you've also had a recent sort of opportunity, kind of started in April with Huntsville AI Task Force that kind of started up.
Right.
Talk a little bit about kind of that and what 2024 so far, since that has kind of looked like for the task force, as well as, what does 2025 look like? Okay.
Yeah, the interesting part, Huntsville AI Task Force, initially we were doing a meetup, and then Lynn showed up, who was one of the, I'm not sure what founders or chairpersons, I would say chairperson, of the AI Huntsville Task Force. Came in and said, hey, we're starting a task force to try to identify impacts to Huntsville from an AI perspective, how we're going to need to shift our workforce, or really anything, because it's somewhat unknown at this point. And so, would you be interested? Like, yeah, it sounds like AI, and it sounds interesting to talk about. So, really looking at if there's a way to guess what the impact to Huntsville as a community is going to be from AI is a hard thing. If you look at where AI is coming in lately, I'd say since 2022 timeframe, anything that is the concept before was kind of a knowledge worker, somebody that works with knowledge, somebody that takes data and then provides insight into that or does something similar. I mean, you're looking at folks like computer programmers, people that do a lot of writing. You're looking at marketing. You're looking at people that take data coming in from different aspects of a business. Maybe your financial reports, maybe your, how your programs are doing, and then taking all of that, combining it, making some kind of an analysis on that. A lot of that is now nearly entirely possible out of the box with some of the, latest AI models.
Wow.
So you're at a point where even from writing computer code, a lot of the things, and no, it's not perfect. It's not going to generate perfect code, but neither do new developers.
Yeah.
And it's so you're seeing wide adoption of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And at the point where the job that I'm doing today is probably very different from the job I'm going to be doing in 5 years. Just based on there's a lot of things I do by hand right now that I won't have to do by hand anymore. Yeah. And then the kind of the two ways to think about it, one of them is, the fear of, what if all these jobs go away? Because it can be done automatically. The other side of that is, what if we can do more of it? Because currently we're constrained by the number of developers we have. So if I'm not constrained in that way, but now my developers may not be doing exactly the same thing we were doing before. But then the whole part of it is, who can guess what that looks like? What is it going to be? And if we can set our own path to that, it should set us up to be much more successful than if we take a reactionary kind of stance and just wait and see what everybody else does.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible just to think. I mean, I think, when ChatGPT became a thing, it's like one of those like, oh wow, like I kind of finally realized the AI, like what AI is there, but the presence that AI has had for way longer than that, in subtle ways and in ways to kind of speed the process up of certain things. Obviously, when you moved here to Huntsville 20 years ago, you moved to get out of the hustle and bustle of a big city, and Huntsville's continuing now to become a bigger city. Besides the work you do, what kind of keeps you here in Huntsville, and what do you enjoy and love most about the city?
It's really interesting. If you think of like, and I can't even use the word Madison County because we're actually wider than just Madison County. I personally currently live in Jackson County, just barely over the county line. One of my primary coworkers at work lives in Limestone County.
Wow.
We meet in the, so it's much, much larger than just the city. But really what keeps me here, other than work, is the community. There's so many interesting people here. One of the main differences from Orlando is what I would call more of a transitive city. You rarely would run into a native Orlando person.
Yeah.
Somebody that grew up there. I knew a few, but most people would either come in and leave, or it's so hard to keep a sense of where do you get your car repaired? Where are good places to eat here? Because nobody, as long as you are good at advertising, you can keep your parking lot full because there's no track record there's no internal memory really there. But here the other thing you had in Orlando is everybody would come in from various places, from all their different cultural backgrounds. And this is just my perspective, my opinion. To me, it seemed like they would all kind of keep to themselves, where, we had giant Puerto Rican community, great food. You had a Vietnamese community. You had a lot of different communities in Orlando, but it seemed like everyone kind of kept what they brought with them. Whereas Huntsville, it seems like, yes, please, everybody brings the culture they have, but then it's a mix. Mm-hmm. You cross paths with so many different people, where there I really didn't.
Yeah. And I if I had to guess over the course of even just doing Huntsville AI, or even just the course of, being here in Huntsville, you've probably met some unique people and had some unique stories. Is there a particular story or an interaction that you've had, maybe with an AI or maybe not, that kind of stands out above the rest?
I guess, and I don't know if it was due to, this just popped in my head, so it's not something we talked about before, so I forgot this happened. As COVID, actually, this was just before COVID. We did it again during COVID. There's a conference. It's a national conference for AI called NeurIPS. And they put out a call for paper, not a call for paper, it was basically a request for help. They were currently running this giant conference up in the Northeast. Seattle, I think eventually they moved it up to the Canadian side, and you're looking at 25,000+ people trying to go to a technical conference. They got to the point where they were accepting paper. And again, AI has been growing at such a breakneck pace. You can actually go look at how many papers are published on AI every year.
Wow.
Year over year over year. And so as one of the conferences where a lot of these were presented, they didn't have enough room. So you could have a paper accepted by NeurIPS, but you weren't even allowed to go because, all the tickets were taken. Plus, it's looking at it from a global conference perspective. It's kind of hard to travel globally sometimes. You got visas you got to worry about, So they had put out something on, hey, we're looking at doing remote conferences. Is anybody experienced with running remote stuff? I'm like, hi, They just needed to know, hey, what are your plans? What are you going to do? And so I just submitted. There's no way they're going to let a little group from Huntsville be part, And they're like, yeah, that sounds great. I'm like, oh, shoot. Now I have to organize, So leaned a little bit on some of the co-working night folks. We actually spun it up at Huntsville West and did a remote NeurIPS meeting.
Wow.
It was one of 5 in North America across
And it was right here in Huntsville.
It was right here in Huntsville. There was one in Boston. There was one over in L.A., I think. I think Stanford hosted one. Most of Stanford goes in person, but, So that was one of the most interesting things. And that's also something that kind of plays into how things work in Huntsville. If you have an idea or if you think you can do something, go do it. Forget about the whole, well, nobody would pick this or nobody's going to allow me to do that. Well, if there's no rules that say you can't,
Yeah.
If it's an open call, go put your name in.
Yeah, and I think like that collaborative nature of Huntsville is very unique, and it's not kind of that competition looking. It's not like, oh, if I can't do this because someone else is, or I can't work together. It's like, let's collaborate and let's become better at it together, because it helps supports the community at a greater rate that way. But I appreciate you taking the last little bit talking about Huntsville AI. We'll have all the information to Huntsville AI in the show notes. So if you want to find out more information about it, join the mailing list, find out more, learn about AI, you can visit that. But I appreciate you being here today.
All right, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the What's So Smart podcast. Stay connected with us on all your social media platforms at A Smart Place. You can watch the full conversations on our YouTube channel at Huntsville, Alabama, USA, and be sure to subscribe wherever you listen. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed hearing more about what makes Huntsville so smart.